Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of the Mississippi River Valley. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing what places and what times of day or night these documented stories reach. In the summer of 1911, the small riverside settlement of Blackford's Landing sat forgotten among the cypress knees and mudflats of the Mississippi River. Once a promising trading post in the 1880s, by the turn of the century, it had become little more than a collection of weathered buildings clinging to existence along the river's edge. Among these structures stood the Riverman's Rest, a tavern operated by Jeremiah Blackford, grandson of the settlement's founder. The tavern had always been a place of respite for river workers, travelers, and locals alike. Its weathered wooden facade, darkened by decades of river humidity, bore a hand-painted sign that creaked on rusty chains whenever the wind blew in from the water. The interior was simple, a long oak bar salvaged from a steamboat that had sunk nearby in 1887, mismatched tables and chairs, and oil lamps that cast long shadows across the uneven floorboards. Nothing about its appearance suggested anything beyond an ordinary establishment serving ordinary spirits to ordinary men. But in June of 1911, something changed. The establishment that had been known primarily for its reasonable whiskey and plain meals began to draw patrons from unusually far distances. Men from as far as Memphis and New Orleans would make the journey specifically to visit this unassuming establishment. According to records at the time, the Riverman's Rest began to develop a reputation for serving something special that couldn't be found elsewhere. It was Marshal Thomas Hayward who first noted the unusual pattern in his weekly reports. An unexplained increase in river traffic, particularly small personal vessels, has been observed in the vicinity of Blackford's Landing. The nature of this traffic appears suspicious, as these visitors do not engage in usual trade or social activities, but instead spend their time exclusively at the Riverman's Rest Tavern. Hayward's journals, discovered during a courthouse renovation in 1963, reveal a man increasingly troubled by the changes he observed. The character of Blackford's establishment appears to be transforming, he wrote on July 2, 1911. Whereas before it served primarily local men of modest means, now expensive carriages and private boats deliver gentlemen in fine attire who speak with educated accents. They arrive at odd hours and conduct their business behind closed doors. Blackford himself has taken to wearing tailored suits and has hired additional staff who do not reside in our community. What Marshal Hayward could not have known was that he was documenting the beginning of what would become one of the most disturbing cases in the history of the Mississippi River Valley, a case that would remain largely unknown until 1963, when a historical preservation team discovered a collection of sealed county records during the renovation of the old Greenville courthouse. The discovery of these records revealed that between March and November of 1911, 17 men who had visited the Riverman's Rest were reported missing by their families. 17 men who, according to all official records, simply vanished from existence after their visits to Blackford's Landing, but the reports from Marshal Hayward suggested something far more sinister than coincidental disappearances. An entry dated July 18, 1911 reads, "Local resident Edward Matheson reports unusual sounds from the Riverman's Rest during late-night hours, described as not quite human, but not animal either." Upon investigation, proprietor Blackford explained the sounds as river folk singing after too much drink. No evidence of disturbance was found. Another entry dated August the 3rd notes, "Strong, unpleasant odor reported emanating from behind the tavern, particularly after rainfall. Blackford claims issues with waste disposal due to rising river levels. Have instructed him to remedy the situation." A week later, Hayward wrote that the smell had been addressed, but he remained suspicious of the explanation offered. Perhaps most telling was Hayward's observation about changes to the physical structure of the tavern itself. Blackford has undertaken significant modifications to his establishment, he wrote on August 24th. New walls have been constructed within, creating rooms not visible from the main area. Windows have been covered over with wooden panels, allegedly to prevent river dampness. Most concerning, a new cellar entrance has been installed with an iron door and lock of unusual sophistication for such a modest establishment. The steady increase in missing persons reports eventually drew the attention of authorities from the county seat in Greenville. By September 1911, what began as a routine investigation into possible alcohol tax evasion gradually evolved into something the investigating officers were entirely unprepared for. According to the records discovered in 1963, Inspector Samuel Donnelly of the Greenville Police Department wrote in his final report, "What we found in the cellar of the Riverman's Rest defies rational explanation. I hereby recommend the immediate arrest of Jeremiah Blackford and all associated parties, as well as the sealing of all documentation related to this case." The report was dated November 7, 1911. 3 days later, on November 10th, the Riverman's Rest burned to the ground in what was officially recorded as an accident caused by an unattended stove. The case was closed, the record sealed, and Blackford's Landing was abandoned within a year. The settlement would eventually be reclaimed by the river during the floods of 1927, erasing nearly all physical evidence of its existence. What actually happened at the Riverman's Rest? What was being served that drew men from hundreds of miles away? And what did Inspector Donnelly find in that cellar that was so disturbing that all records were ordered sealed? The answers lay hidden for over 50 years until Dr. Margaret Winters, a historical researcher specializing in Mississippi River settlements, began piecing together the fragmented evidence. Dr. Winters' initial interest in Blackford's Landing stemmed from her broader research on abandoned river communities. In 1962, while conducting interviews with elderly residents of Washington County, she encountered several who mentioned Blackford's Landing with noticeable discomfort. "Nobody goes there," one man told her, "not since the trouble with that tavern." When pressed for details, most would change the subject or claim faulty memory. But one woman, Eunice Palmer, age 93, provided the first concrete lead. "My husband worked on the docks in Greenville," Palmer told Dr. Winters. "He was there when they brought in the things they found in that place. Wasn't supposed to talk about it, but he told me some. Said they found equipment like nobody around here had ever seen. Foreign-looking things. And ledgers with names that would have made people mighty uncomfortable if they ever got out." This testimony led Dr. Winters to search for official records related to Blackford's Landing. She discovered that all documents concerning the settlement from 1910 to 1912 had been sealed by court order, an unusual measure for what should have been routine municipal records. After petitioning for academic access, she was finally granted limited permission to view the files in 1963, coincidentally just after additional records had been discovered during courthouse renovations. The first unusual detail Dr. Winters uncovered was in the inventory list attached to Inspector Donnelly's report. Among the items confiscated from the tavern were 12 silver-plated serving trays of unusual design, specialized kitchen implements of European origin, and most notably, ledger books containing names, dates, and amounts paid, with notations in an unknown cipher. But perhaps the most disturbing item was listed simply as preserved specimens of unidentified origin. No further description was provided, and according to Dr. Winters' research, these specimens were never officially examined by professionals before being destroyed. The inventory also listed modified instruments, custom glass containers of various sizes with hermetic seals, and 27 bottles of imported spices and preservative compounds, primarily of Eastern European origin. These items, while not explicitly incriminating, painted a picture of operations far beyond what would be expected in a riverside tavern in rural Mississippi. Most puzzling to Dr. Winters was an item described as mechanical apparatus for sound suppression, believed to be of German manufacture. This device, according to a supplementary note, was connected to a system of pipes and acoustic baffles installed throughout the private dining areas of the establishment. The true horror of what occurred at the Riverman's Rest began to emerge when Dr. Winters discovered a collection of personal letters belonging to Inspector Donnelly, found in the attic of his former home in 1965. In these letters, addressed but never sent to his superior in the state capital, Donnelly described in disturbing detail what he had witnessed. "The cellar of the establishment has been modified extensively," he wrote. "Drainage channels have been cut into the stone floor, all leading to a central collection point that empties directly into the river. The walls have been lined with cork imported from Spain, according to the shipping manifests we discovered, presumably to dampen sound. But it is the preparation area that defies comprehension." Donnelly's description of this preparation area was clinical and detached, as if he were struggling to maintain professional distance from what he had witnessed. Tables of medical-grade steel, specialized cutting implements arranged with surgical precision, preservation containers of varying sizes, some still containing portions. The methodology suggests training far beyond what one would expect from a simple tavern keeper. In another letter, dated November 8, 1911, Donnelly wrote, "I find myself unable to sleep. The images from that cellar persist in my mind. Of particular disturbance was the dining room adjacent to the preparation area. The table settings were of fine quality, yet designed with certain modifications I cannot bring myself to describe in full. The chairs were equipped with restraints concealed beneath elegant upholstery. And the viewing window between the dining area and the preparation room, what manner of men would wish to observe such processes while they dined?" The most disturbing revelation came from recovered fragments of the tavern's ledger books. While most of the cipher remained unbroken, Dr. Winters and her colleagues were able to determine that the entries corresponded to dates, customer names, and amounts paid for specialized dining experiences. According to the partial translation published in Dr. Winters's 1967 monograph, Dark Commerce Along the Mississippi, 1880-1920, the tavern operated on a tier system, with customers progressing through levels of dining experiences that increased in both price and exclusivity. The entries followed a consistent pattern: a date, initials, presumably of the customer, a numeric code, and a substantial monetary amount. Marginal notations included terms like Grade A, Special Reserve, or occasionally Refused Advancement. Most telling were entries marked Initiation Complete, which were always followed by dramatically increased payment amounts in subsequent visits. A separate journal, believed to have been Jeremiah Blackford's personal record, contained philosophical musings on the nature of consumption and desire. One partially burned page recovered from the ruins contained the following passage: "What separates man from beast is not his capacity for thought, but his capacity for indulgence. Animals eat to survive, men eat to experience. And what greater experience than to consume that which is forbidden?" Another passage read, "I have observed that in each man there exists a hunger deeper than that which common food can satisfy. A hunger of the soul, perhaps, though I am not a religious man. To taste the forbidden is to touch something primal, to become both more and less than human simultaneously. My patrons do not merely come for sustenance, they come for transformation." The investigation took an even darker turn when Dr. Winters discovered medical records from the Mississippi State Asylum, which indicated that Jeremiah Blackford had spent 3 years there between 1901 and 1904, following an incident at a New Orleans restaurant where he had worked as a sous chef. The details of this incident were never clearly documented, but his admission papers noted disturbing ideations regarding food preparation and extreme gastronomy. The asylum records described Blackford as highly intelligent, articulate, and possessed of refined manners. His attending physician noted that he was particularly knowledgeable about anatomy and the preparation of rare delicacies, with a concerning tendency to discuss these subjects in unusual terms. More disturbing was the note that Blackford expresses the belief that certain forbidden culinary experiences represent the pinnacle of gastronomy and the ultimate expression of power over conventional morality. Blackford was released in 1904 after being deemed cured of his delusions by the asylum director, Dr. James Whitfield. Interestingly, Dr. Winters discovered that Whitfield resigned his position unexpectedly in 1905 and relocated to Europe. Financial records indicated that prior to his departure, he had received a substantial sum from an unnamed source, allowing him to purchase a villa in southern France. Perhaps the most chilling evidence came from a statement given by Eliza Cartwright, a laundress who had worked briefly at the Riverman's Rest in the spring of 1911. Her testimony, buried in the sealed court records, described how Blackford would entertain certain guests in a private dining room behind the main tavern area. Those men would come in looking nervous-like, but excited too, she stated. Mr. Blackford would greet them special, not like regular customers. They'd go to that back room, and I wasn't never allowed to clean in there until the next morning. Always smelled strange in there, not like regular food, and the linens. The stains weren't like any food stains I ever seen before. Cartwright also described overhearing fragments of conversation between Blackford and his special guests. One night I was bringing fresh towels when I heard a gentleman ask, "Is it true what they say about the quality being affected by the emotional state at the time of preparation?" Mr. Blackford laughed in that way he had, soft-like, but not friendly. He said something about the condition tenderizing the experience before he saw me and closed the door. Eliza Cartwright left her position after only 6 weeks, citing illness. She died 3 months later of what was recorded as nervous exhaustion, leading to heart failure, a common diagnosis at the time for what might now be recognized as extreme psychological trauma. Further evidence of the tavern's disturbing operations came from shipping records discovered by Dr. Winters. Between January and October 1911, Blackford received regular deliveries of specialized equipment from New Orleans, Chicago, and even Europe. These included refrigeration apparatus of German design, custom glassware from Vienna, and, most disturbing, reference materials from a medical supplier in Philadelphia. The records also showed regular deliveries of unusual spices and preservatives, including several substances that were regulated due to their potential toxicity. One order form requested 4 ounces of Hungarian paprika, 2 bottles of French black truffle oil, and sufficient quantity of chemical preservatives for specialized purposes. Perhaps most damning were the financial records showing substantial payments from Blackford to the captain of a local patrol boat, suggesting official protection for whatever operations were being conducted at the Riverman's Rest. These payments increased significantly in August 1911, coinciding with Marshal Hayward's growing suspicions about the establishment. The investigation stalled in 1968 when Dr. Winters' research grant was unexpectedly terminated, and the recovered documents were once again sealed by court order, citing historical sensitivity concerns. However, before the records were resealed, Dr. Winters had made extensive notes that would eventually form the basis of an unpublished manuscript found among her possessions after her death in 1969. This manuscript, titled The Epicurean Abominations of Blackford's Landing, contained Dr. Winters' complete theory regarding the Riverman's Rest. According to her conclusions, Jeremiah Blackford had established a specialized dining establishment that catered to wealthy men with particular appetites that could not be legally or morally satisfied elsewhere. The evidence suggests that Blackford operated what might be termed a culinary cult, centered around experiences that violated fundamental social taboos, she wrote. This was not, however, a simple case of criminal activity. Rather, it was a sophisticated commercial enterprise that transformed forbidden desires into luxury experiences for wealthy clients willing to pay extraordinary sums for the ultimate transgression. The manuscript detailed Blackford's apparent methodology, which combined elements of haute cuisine with ritualistic practices. The evidence suggests that Blackford approached his work as a form of art, Dr. Winters wrote. The specialized implements, imported spices, and elaborate presentation described in witness accounts indicate that he viewed himself not as a criminal, but as a craftsman, elevating forbidden practices to the level of high gastronomy. The something special being served at the Riverman's Rest was never explicitly named in any surviving document, but Dr. Winters's analysis points to experiences that violated the most fundamental of human taboos. Dr. Winters' theory was that Blackford had developed a network for procuring ingredients from among the transient population that traveled the Mississippi, people who would not be missed or searched for, river workers, drifters, and occasionally, according to one disturbing notation in the ledger, specimens of particular quality that commanded premium prices. The ledger entries suggest a classification system based on the characteristics of the sources, Dr. Winters noted. References to grain-fed, muscular, youthful, and tender appear frequently, alongside price points that varied accordingly. Most disturbing are entries that specify educated, artistic, or refined specimens, suggesting that Blackford believed the occupation, intelligence, or social status somehow affected the quality of his offerings, a perversion of the culinary concept of terroir applied to his unspeakable practice. The manuscript also detailed the progression system that Blackford appeared to have established for his clients. The first level of dining experience likely involved exotic but legal fare, presented as more taboo than they actually were, creating the illusion of transgression without actual criminality. This served as both a test of the client's receptiveness and a psychological preparation for what would follow. Subsequent levels involved increasingly explicit violations of social taboos, beginning with what Blackford reportedly called ambiguous consumption, dishes that allowed clients to maintain a degree of psychological distance from what they were consuming. The highest levels, reserved for those who had demonstrated full commitment to Blackford's philosophy, allegedly involved not only explicit consumption of forbidden substances, but participation in the selection and preparation process. The most disturbing entries in the ledger refer to full participation experiences charged at rates exceeding $500, equivalent to nearly a year's wages for an average worker at that time. These entries coincide with the disappearances of men who had previously been regular patrons of the establishment. The 17 men who disappeared after visiting the tavern were not victims in the traditional sense. According to Dr. Winters' analysis, they were customers who had progressed to the highest tier of Blackford's offerings, a tier that apparently included participation in the procurement and preparation process. This theory was supported by an entry in Marshall Hayward's journal dated October 12, 1911. Blackford has acquired a motorized boat of considerable power. He claims it is for supplying his establishment, yet I have observed it returning in the early morning hours without visible cargo. Of particular note are the occasions when it has departed with certain well-dressed patrons aboard, only to return with these same individuals appearing disheveled and acting in an agitated manner. What Inspector Donnelly discovered in November 1911 was not merely a site of illegal activity, but an organized operation catering to wealthy men seeking the ultimate forbidden experience. The fire that destroyed the Riverman's Rest 3 days after Donnelly's inspection was, according to a note in his personal papers, a necessary sanitization. This note, written in the margin of his official report, suggests that the destruction of the tavern was not accidental, but a deliberate act intended to eliminate evidence. The question remains, was this destruction ordered by authorities to prevent public panic, or was it arranged by Blackford's wealthy clients to protect their identities? Most disturbing of all was a report from a river worker dated November 11, 1911, the day after the fire. He claimed to have seen several well-dressed men boarding a steamboat at a small dock approximately 1 mile downriver from Blackford's landing. Among them, he believed, was Jeremiah Blackford himself. The worker, identified only as C.J. in the records, stated, "I recognized one of them gentlemen from before. He'd come through on the Memphis packet several times, always stopping at Blackford's place. Real important-looking fellow, with a gold watch chain and a walking stick with a silver handle. He was helping another man who kept his face covered with a scarf, even though the morning wasn't cold. That second man had the same way of standing as Blackford, straight-backed, with his head tilted just so. No record exists of Blackford's arrest, trial, or death. He simply vanished from official history after the fire, along with his customer list and any definitive proof of what transpired at his establishment. The mysterious circumstances surrounding the case deepened when Dr. Winters discovered that Inspector Donnelly had resigned from his position shortly after filing his report. He relocated to Colorado, where he lived in apparent isolation until his death in 1932. His death certificate lists the cause as self-inflicted gunshot wound, and the only note found in his possession reportedly read, "I can no longer bear the memory of what I witnessed. May God forgive us all for what was permitted to occur." In 1964, during the construction of a riverside park near the former location of Blackford's Landing, workers uncovered a collection of silver-plated serving trays buried approximately 6 feet below the surface. According to the brief newspaper account, these trays were of unusual design, featuring ornate engraving, unlike typical servingware of the period. They were sent to a museum in Greenville, but were reportedly lost during a cataloging process. No photographs or detailed descriptions survive. A worker involved in the excavation later told a local historian that the trays had channels carved into them, running to a central depression, like they were designed to collect something. He also mentioned that several of the trays bore monograms of what appeared to be family crests or initials, suggesting they had been custom-made for specific clients. The story of the Riverman's Rest might have remained completely buried, were it not for a former patron of the establishment who, nearing death in 1962, confessed to his physician about his experiences there. This confession, documented in the physician's private notes, but never made public during the patient's lifetime, described the progression from ordinary customer to participant in Blackford's special dining society. It began innocently enough, the patient reportedly stated. Fine liquor, conversation with men of means and education. Then Blackford would mention his special menu available only to select patrons. The first experience was merely exotic meats, or so we were told, foreign delicacies prepared in the European manner. The patient described how Blackford would gradually reveal the true nature of his offerings, gauging reactions carefully. Those who showed disgust or moral outrage were never invited back and were presumably discouraged from speaking about their experience through threats or bribes. Those who showed interest were invited deeper into Blackford's world. He had a philosophy about it all, the patient continued, said that civilized men had moved too far from their true nature. That consumption was the most honest relationship one being could have with another. I stopped attending after the third dinner. Some of the others continued. I heard later that the most devoted patrons were eventually invited to not just dine, but to help select the ingredients. The physician who documented this confession noted that the patient exhibited extreme anxiety when discussing the tavern, frequently checking windows and doors during their conversation. The patient died 3 weeks later of natural causes, his identity protected by medical confidentiality. The physician's notes include a disturbing description of how Blackford would prepare his clients for the truth about his offerings. The patient described a ritual of sorts. Before revealing the nature of the meat, Blackford would serve increasingly exotic animals, snake, monkey, and other creatures not commonly consumed in America. Each meal was accompanied by philosophical discussion about the arbitrary nature of food taboos across cultures. By the time the truth was revealed, the psychological groundwork had been laid. Most chilling was the patient's description of the moment he realized what he had been consuming. Blackford had a particular way of serving the special dish. It would arrive covered, and he would remove the cover himself with a certain ceremony. The presentation was always artistic. One could almost forget what one was looking at. Almost. But then he would name the source, sometimes even a description. and he would watch your face as you realized. That was part of his pleasure, I think, watching the moment of realization. In 1968, a former police officer from Greenville, who had been part of the original investigation team in 1911, was interviewed by Dr. Winters. By then elderly and suffering from dementia, his recollections were fragmented but disturbing. He repeatedly mentioned the soundproof room and the special plates with the channels. When pressed about what happened to Jeremiah Blackford, the former officer became agitated and would only say, "Some men are too valuable to certain other men to ever see justice." This officer, identified in Dr. Winters' notes as Franklin Miller, had been present during the inspection of the tavern. Despite his cognitive decline, certain memories remained vivid. They had a room, he told Dr. Scher Winters, with a glass wall between it and the kitchen, like a window, but thick. You could sit at the table and watch the preparation. Some of them wanted to watch. Blackford said it enhanced the experience. Miller also recalled finding photographs during the raid, pictures of the customers at their meals, smiling, raising glasses and toasts, like it was a normal dinner party. Blackford kept them in an album, evidence of who had partaken. Insurance, he called it when we questioned him, said it guaranteed the continued patronage and discretion of his clients. When asked why such damning evidence did not lead to prosecutions, Miller became evasive before finally admitting, "Orders came from the Capitol. Everything was to be sealed. No reports, no trials. Too many important names involved. My superior told me to forget what I'd seen if I valued my pension and my life." The investigation effectively ended with Dr. Winters' sudden death in 1969, officially attributed to a stroke. However, colleagues noted that she had been in excellent health and had mentioned receiving concerning correspondence in the weeks before her death. Her research materials were donated to the University of Mississippi Archives, but were subsequently lost during a facility relocation in 1972. One colleague, Dr. Howard Jensen, later revealed that Winters had confided in him about a breakthrough in her research shortly before her death. "She told me she had identified several of the patrons from Blackford's ledger," Jensen recounted in a 1980 interview for an academic journal. "She matched the initials with prominent men from the region, politicians, industrialists, even a federal judge. She was planning to publish her findings despite having received warnings not to pursue the matter further. For decades, the case of the Rivermen's Rest remained dormant, known only to a few specialists in obscure historical crimes. Then, in 1995, during dredging operations near the former location of Blackford's Landing, workers recovered a sealed metal container containing what appeared to be preserved specimens. According to the brief examination that followed, the contents had been preserved using techniques consistent with medical practices of the early 20th century. The container also held a small silver tag engraved with the words "Specimen R37, Premium Grade, reserved for Mr. W." This discovery prompted a brief renewed interest in the case, but without further evidence or institutional support for an investigation, the matter was once again closed. The recovered materials were properly disposed of following standard procedures. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the entire case is not what is known, but what remains unknown. The full client list of the Rivermen's Rest has never been recovered. Given the descriptions of the clientele as men of means and education, it is possible that some of these individuals went on to positions of significant influence in the region. Did their experiences at Blackford's establishment affect their later actions and decisions? Did they continue to seek similar experiences elsewhere? And what of Jeremiah Blackford himself? If he did indeed escape the fire that consumed his establishment, where did he go? Did he establish another operation elsewhere? The physician's notes from 1962 mentioned a rumor among former patrons that Blackford had relocated to South America, specifically Argentina, where he supposedly opened a private dining club in Buenos Aires that operated until at least the late 1920s. In 1959, a small obituary appeared in a Buenos Aires newspaper for one Jeremias Bradford, described as a noted culinary expert and proprietor of exclusive dining establishments. The accompanying photograph, though of poor quality, bears a striking resemblance to the only known image of Jeremiah Blackford from a Greenville business license application dated 1910. The obituary noted that Bradford had arrived in Argentina in 1912 and had quickly established himself among the European expatriate community as a purveyor of unique culinary experiences. It mentioned that his establishment, El Festín Privado, the private feast, catered exclusively to gentlemen of discerning tastes and substantial means. The business apparently closed in 1931, and Bradford Blackford lived in comfortable retirement until his death at the age of 76. Most disturbing was the obituary's mention that Bradford was survived by several devoted students who continue to honor his culinary traditions in private establishments throughout South America and Europe. This suggests that Blackford may have passed on his techniques and philosophy, creating a legacy that potentially continues to the present day. In 1978, a journalist investigating historical crimes along the Mississippi discovered a letter in the archives of a New Orleans newspaper. Dated January 1912, it was from a reader signing only as a concerned citizen and alluded to abominations occurring at a certain establishment upriver, where men of supposedly good character indulge in practices that defy all laws of God and man. The newspaper apparently never published the letter, and no investigation was conducted. The Mississippi River has changed course several times since 1911, and the exact location of Blackford's Landing has been lost to erosion and flooding. No physical trace remains of the Riverman's Rest or the horrors that transpired there. All that remains are fragmented records, second-hand accounts, and the disturbing implications of what might have occurred in that riverside tavern. What is perhaps most troubling is the possibility that Blackford's operation was not unique. Historical records from the period indicate several similar establishments along major waterways in the United States, places that catered to wealthy clients seeking exclusive experiences and that were abruptly closed following brief, unpublicized investigations. A researcher examining police records from Chicago identified 3 restaurants that were closed between 1900 and 1915 under unusual circumstances, with all documentation subsequently sealed by court order. Similarly, a private club in New Orleans' French Quarter was shuttered in 1908 following what newspaper accounts vaguely described as discoveries of an unwholesome nature. The owner of this establishment, interestingly, had previously worked in the same New Orleans restaurant as Jeremiah Blackford. In her final unpublished notes, Dr. Winters speculated about the existence of a network of such establishments, possibly sharing techniques, suppliers, and even clientele. She wrote, "The evidence suggests not isolated incidents of depravity, but an organized subculture catering to wealthy individuals with particular tastes. The similarities in operating methods, the connections between proprietors, and the consistent pattern of official suppression all point to something more structured than individual aberration." She further noted, "The geographical distribution of these establishments, primarily along major waterways, suggests a deliberate strategy for both procurement of ingredients and disposal of evidence. Rivers provided access to transient populations unlikely to be missed, as well as convenient means of disposing of remains. Additionally, the constant flow of river traffic provided cover for the movement of supplies, personnel, and patrons." Perhaps most disturbing was her speculation that this network might not be entirely historical. "The question that haunts me," she wrote in her final notes, "is whether this network truly disbanded or whether it merely adapted to changing times." The appetite that Blackford cultivated in his clients, this hunger for the ultimate forbidden experience, would not simply disappear with his departure. One must consider the possibility that such establishments continue to operate, perhaps in more sophisticated forms, catering to descendants of the original clientele or to new generations of wealthy individuals seeking to transcend conventional boundaries. The case of the Riverman's Rest serves as a disturbing reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of civilized society. It raises uncomfortable questions about the nature of desire, consumption, and what humans are capable of when freed from moral and social constraints. In the words of Dr. Winter's final unpublished note, the true horror of the Riverman's Rest is not what was served there, but who it was served to. Men of standing, education, and influence, the very pillars of society, participating in the most fundamental taboo. If such men could develop a taste for these abominations, what does that reveal about human nature itself? This question remains unanswered, as does the ultimate fate of Jeremiah Blackford and his clients. The case exists now primarily as fragments, partial records, second-hand accounts, and disturbing implications. Each attempt to investigate further has been met with resistance, suppression, or mysterious setbacks, suggesting that even after more than a century, certain interests remain invested in keeping the full truth buried. The Mississippi flows on, its muddy waters carrying secrets downstream. Blackford's Landing is gone, the Riverman's Rest is ashes, and those who dined there have long since passed away. But somewhere, perhaps in a private collection or forgotten archive, Jeremiah Blackford's recipes and client list may still exist, a menu of horrors and a register of monsters wearing the masks of respectable men. As we conclude this account, one final detail deserves mention. In 1967, during her investigation, Dr. Winters interviewed an elderly woman who had lived near Blackford's Landing as a child. The woman recalled seeing well-dressed men arriving by boat, sometimes in the middle of the night. They came hungry, she said, but they left looking different. Not satisfied exactly, more like changed, like they'd seen something they couldn't unsee. Some would be sick right there on the dock. Others would sit very still, staring at the water. But they all came back sooner or later. Whatever he was serving in that place, it got into them somehow. The woman also recalled a conversation she had overheard as a child while hiding beneath the dock one evening. Two men were speaking as they waited for a boat to collect them. One of them asked the other if he thought they were damned for what they'd done, she told Dr. Winters. The other man laughed and said they were already damned before they ever came to Blackford's. That's why they sought it out in the first place. He said something I never forgot. He said, "There are two types of men in this world, those who never discover their true appetites and those who do. Only the latter truly live." Whatever was served at the Riverman's Rest was more than mere food. It was an experience that transformed those who partook of it, an initiation into darkness from which there was no return. And in the end, perhaps that was the true purpose of Jeremiah Blackford's establishment, not merely to satisfy forbidden appetites, but to create them, to transform respectable men into willing accomplices to atrocity, bound together by shared guilt and unnatural hunger. In 1966, an anonymous donor provided funds to erect a small stone marker near the former location of Blackford's Landing. The marker bears no name, no dates, only a simple inscription: "Let those who hunger beware what they feed upon." Local officials approved the monument without questioning its significance, assuming it to be a memorial to river disasters or perhaps a biblical reference. The few who know the true story recognize it as both a memorial and a warning. The waters of the Mississippi continue to rise and fall with the seasons. Occasionally, during periods of extreme drought, objects from the submerged settlement emerge briefly from the mud: fragments of brick, twisted metal, shards of glass polished smooth by the current. Locals tend to leave these artifacts untouched, preferring not to disturb whatever memories remain buried there. The tavern that served more than whiskey has been gone for over a century now, but the hunger it awakened may have lingered long after, passed down through generations of influence and power. And somewhere, perhaps, that hunger still waits to be fed. For in the dark corners of human desire, there will always be those who seek the forbidden, and those willing to serve it for the right price. As Blackford himself wrote in his journal, "Appetite once awakened can never truly be put back to sleep. It can only be temporarily satisfied before it rises again, stronger and more demanding than before. And therein lies the true power of what I offer, not the meal itself, but the hunger that follows. The story of the Riverman's Rest contains a troubling truth about humanity, that beneath the veneer of civilization and morality, there exists in some individuals a capacity for unspeakable transgression. More disturbing still is the possibility that such individuals are not always the outcasts of society, but sometimes its most respected members. Dr. Winter's final research notes, discovered after her death, contained a passage that serves as a fitting epitaph for both the tavern and its proprietor. The true genius and evil of Jeremiah Blackford was not in creating something new, but in recognizing something ancient that lurks within certain men. He simply provided the opportunity and justification for that darkness to emerge. He did not corrupt the innocent. He identified the already corrupted and offered them community in their depravity. In 1975, a retired riverboat captain named Samuel Harkins gave an interview to a local historian in which he mentioned a strange experience from his early days on the river. In the summer of 1911, he had transported a group of well-dressed gentlemen to Blackford's Landing for what they described as a hunting expedition. When he returned 3 days later to collect them, he found them changed, subdued, introspective, some visibly ill. One of them, a lawyer from Memphis, sat apart from the others on the return journey, Harkins recalled. When I asked if the hunting had been good, he looked at me with the strangest expression and said, "Too good. I've seen things that can't be unseen." I thought at the time he meant they'd had some accident, maybe someone had been hurt. It wasn't until years later, when I heard rumors about that place, that I understood what he might have meant. Harkins also mentioned that on several occasions he had been paid substantial sums to transport crates and boxes to the landing during night hours, with instructions not to examine the cargo or discuss the deliveries. I didn't ask questions, he admitted. The money was too good, but sometimes I'd hear noises from those crates, scratching sounds. Once, what sounded like muffled crying. I told myself it was animals for the kitchen, had to tell myself something to sleep at night. The case of the Riverman's Rest raises disturbing questions about how society deals with evil when it appears in unexpected places. The apparent cover-up by authorities suggests that the reputation of prominent individuals was deemed more important than justice for the unknown victims of Blackford's enterprise. This pattern, the protection of the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable, is perhaps the most enduring legacy of the case. In recent years, there have been occasional reports of exclusive, invitation-only dining clubs in major cities that claim to serve the ultimate gastronomic experience to wealthy patrons. These establishments operate in private residences or remote locations, change venues frequently, and require extensive vetting of potential clients. While there is no evidence linking these modern operations to Blackford's historical activities, the parallels are difficult to ignore. A food critic who claimed to have received an invitation to one such event, which he declined, described the invitation as including philosophical quotations about transcending conventional limitations and experiencing the true nature of consumption. The invitation reportedly concluded with a question: are you one who merely feeds or one who truly hungers? The Mississippi River continues its timeless journey to the sea, carrying with it the secrets of countless lives and deaths. Blackford's Landing exists now only in fragmented records and fading memories. The Riverman's Rest is gone, its horrors consigned to history, but the shadows it cast remain, in sealed documents, in whispered stories, and in the uncomfortable question it forces us to confront. How well do we really know those who walk among us, especially those of wealth and influence? As Blackford himself supposedly told a patron during a private dinner, the greatest monsters wear the finest clothes, attend the best schools, and are welcomed in the finest homes. Their monstrosity lies not in their appearance or manner, but in what they are willing to consume. The story of the Riverman's Rest is more than a historical curiosity or a macabre tale. It is a warning about the darkness that can lurk behind respectable facades and the lengths to which the powerful will go to protect their secrets. It reminds us that evil rarely announces itself, but instead insinuates itself gradually, offering justifications and rationalizations that make the unthinkable seem, if not acceptable, at least understandable. In the end, perhaps the most enduring legacy of Jeremiah Blackford and his establishment is not the specific horrors they perpetrated, but the questions they raise about human nature itself. What forbidden hungers might exist in any of us, waiting for the right circumstances or the right invitation to emerge? And how might we recognize and resist our own capacity for moral compromise? The waters of the Mississippi have long since closed over the site of Blackford's Landing. The men who dined at the Riverman's Rest have all gone to their graves, taking their secrets with them. But the questions they leave behind remain as relevant today as they were in 1911. For as long as there are those who hunger for the forbidden, there will be those willing to serve it. And the line between consumer and consumed, predator and prey, is perhaps thinner than any of us would care to admit.